Hello, I'm Jonathan Bowman-Perks and welcome back to my favourite time of the week. And as part of the Inspiring Leadership series, I'm very lucky to be here with Martin Williams. Martin is the CEO of M, the restaurant brand, and also Gaucho. So Martin, welcome. It's great to have you on the series.
Thank you.
Do you want to just tell us in just a snapshot what you're doing at the moment, just right now, as far as your leadership?
So we have two brands which are both under one umbrella company, Rare Restaurants. I'm the CEO of that company, so CEO and founder of M and CEO of Gaucho. We have 16 Gaucho restaurants, 3 M restaurants, and to say they're just restaurants would be an understatement. They're actually brands which have lifestyle elements, membership elements. So the challenge as a restaurateur and as CEO of that group right now is in a fairly tough sector facing lots of headwinds, is to see how they have growth opportunities, how they can build a community of individuals who think of them as a brand or a home from home, and look at all the opportunities for those brands to grow.
Brilliant. And you as an inspiring leader, and you were recommended by Nusha Paris. She speaks very highly of you, and many people I've spoken to do. Who's inspired you, very briefly? What would be the two you'd choose, and what qualities do you admire in them?
So I think in CEOs and leaders, two different ones. One would be David Campbell, who worked with Virgin Radio, Formula One, AEG, and Virgin itself. And he inspired me because he was always the guy behind a very high-profile individual, and that high-profile individual was probably renowned for being quite difficult to work with, and he managed to galvanize a team to actually drive change. And he's gone through 4 or 5 different sectors, media, sports entertainment, music entertainment, and then restaurants. So he was latterly working with Richard Carey at the Ivy, another high-profile individual with a reputation. And in each one of the roles I've seen him work in, he's applied very good business sense to drive those businesses forward, regardless of going cross-sector, and has managed to see, I think, the high-profile individual who's heading those companies up as almost taking the buffer while he actually got on with the business of making that business very successful, and getting his senior management team and everyone who worked for him to think of him as a very dynamic individual, even though he was low profile.
Good. And the other one you said was your brother?
The other one is my brother. So Alan Williams, who was MD of Hearst for the last 15 years, he's just gone on to something else. So he created and worked at Men's Health and Women's Health, and was looking after Esquire and other magazines, but particularly with Men's Health. What I admired about him was his achievement of taking something which was quite basic. It was publishing, and it was paper publishing, and then look at that as a brand and look at all the different opportunities for that. So he created food elements to it, sporting event elements to it, the ultimate brand extension, which was Women's Health, a sister brand, and things like survival of the fittest. So he managed to take something, and when people talk about restaurants, I actually talk about brand rather than restaurants, and he did the same, where he, instead of talking about magazines, he looked at the potential of that brand and maximized it. And along his journey, I think he's probably the person I know the most who, the people who worked for him, whether it was senior management or beyond, and he managed to engage everybody who worked for him in his team very well. They would all say his biggest motivating factor was kindness. And he managed to engage with them on a personal level, and everyone within his team on a personal level. And I think when people look at CEOs or leaders, they assume it's completely ruthless and you have to be very austere and hard and sort of grind out results. And Alan managed to get, and continues to manage to get, huge success in getting buy-in. Not necessarily, he has the vision himself, but he manages to take the team with them by personal engagement and actually caring about their role within the journey and how they can be successful personally as well as within his vision of their careers.
What a special brother to have.
Yes, huge support whilst I was
you said that,
in my sort of entrepreneurial elements, over the last 5 years being an entrepreneur, in an environment where it's quite hard to choose what you can share with who.
Exactly.
He was a huge support for me.
Well, that was the next question I was going to ask you was, we all make mistakes, and I'm sure I've made far more than you have, But if you were to pick one story of disappointment, setbacks, or a mistake you made as a leader and how it shaped you now and how you act differently, what would be? I think your story was linked to what you just said about your situation there.
So my journey to today was I worked with Gaucho restaurants for 9 years. I left there as managing director. I then decided to set up my own restaurant group. In the last 4 years, I was an entrepreneur, and that was creating M. And then in the last 12 months, we've basically merged the two companies together. They've been acquired, and now I'm heading both up. But the 4 to 5 years of being the entrepreneur were the most difficult within my entire career. And one of the first mistakes I made was I'd always taken leadership principles as I create a vision, I then surround myself by very talented individuals. They buy into the vision and individually have clear goals, objectives, and I'm sharing as much of the journey with them as possible, and it's very inclusive. I overshared. My biggest mistake in the first year of being an entrepreneur was oversharing the fear of being an entrepreneur. So, well, actually my biggest mistake was not having enough working capital ever as an entrepreneur. And that then manifests itself in fear and can be very stifling. And that's something that
what did you learn
I originally shared with my senior management group and individuals. And I think I very quickly learned that in hindsight, there's a certain level where people don't want to know that much information, and it's unfair actually to share the fear of potentially your company going bust or what are the consequences of having short working capital. And I think as an employee, not that number one figurehead, but as an employee, you should have the right to believe that you're going to be paid on time, you have 100% job security. And to share those fears is actually very unfair. And it had a very destructive, the fear within me may have been, okay, it's 10% is headspace. It became 50% or 70%, and actually, again, was disproportionate within the individuals who, because they didn't necessarily have the full picture, they couldn't see the solutions, or I wasn't sharing the solutions enough with them. And actually I didn't need to. It was simply, they don't need to know that level of detail and the downside as much as I'm sharing it with them.
Very wise. And just to end, what would be your final top tip as a inspiring leader that you share with others?
My top tip would be to try and merge the two elements of business that I've had, or leadership that I've had, which has been being an entrepreneur and a CEO of a big institutionally backed company. And the first time this word was ever mentioned to me was Craig Donaldson, who's CEO of Metro Bank. He's a great guy. And he used the word intrapreneur. And I think that's what I would share is be an entrepreneur within your business. And what do I mean by that? It's embrace all the structure of a business and the bigger business as a whole, but add in the flair of being an entrepreneur, the creativity of being an entrepreneur, having your working day, having meditative elements so that you're free to think, be spontaneous and ambitious and an underdog, but within a bigger company.
Fantastic. Martin, thank you very much indeed.
A pleasure.
I really appreciate you sharing that. We'll have a further conversation in the extra session next. Thank you.